So my name is Katie Schuler. I'm the director of the short film entitled Nigerians Fight to Protect the World's Most Trafficked Mammal. And the idea for this film kind of culminated over the course of several years. I made my first pangolin film, which some of you may have seen at a previous festival. It's called Pangolin, and that was back in 2016, I think. And after I made that film, I wanted, I was inspired by this animal and all of the challenges it's facing, and I decided to explore all of this more. So a bunch of different storytelling opportunities opened up, and one of them was basically making a similar film to the first one, where you follow the entire trafficking route of the single animal from the moment it's taken in the wild to the moment it's consumed. And so we did that for from Southeast Asia to China, and now we were going to show that trade route from Africa to China. And so we got on site in Lagos, Nigeria, which is one of the largest exportation hubs in Africa of pangolin scales and a lot of other illegal wildlife animals and products and parts. And so when we got on site, we were kind of expecting to document all of these things from point A to point B. And then as we were visiting different sites and meeting different people, we quickly realized that our story, where our story really ended up being was, what we really wanted to tell, or what we were there to do was to tell a story about a particular local Nigerian named Marco Fua, Dr. Marco Fua, and all the incredible work that he was doing just out of his own personal time and resources. And so the latest film features him and his work, and also that of the Nigerian Pangolin Working Group. It was our first time shooting in Nigeria, and we did a lot of research to try and make sure it was safe for our team. And it was a little bit tricky because there were elections happening. And so it was kind of a volatile time to be there, but that's just kind of how it worked out with the timing. And there was a lot of, despite having spent a lot of time preparing for the film and trying to, we actually had a security officer come with us. We still ended up in a couple of really sketchy situations where government military were confiscating our cameras and threatening to delete footage. Actually, they did delete some of our footage, just for simply having a camera sticking outside of a car window. And we weren't even trying to film them. We were just had it out the window filming the streets. But anyway, it's just it's a very, whenever you're documenting wildlife trafficking, you're going to, you need to be very sensitive to whether or not people want to have their identities hidden. And so that's something that we try to be very cognizant of, and if people don't want their likeness in the film, we find ways to hide it, or we go to a different location, or we feature somebody else. But it was really important, in this story to show that that the illegal wildlife trade isn't black and white. It's not like there are good people and then there are villains. There's this huge spectrum of gray area, and the poachers and hunters, these are people just trying to get through each day and provide for their families. And they're not nefarious, people that are, taking animals from the wild and making sure that they are that they are illegally trafficked and make it all the way to their, where the source of the demand comes from. They're just kind of singularly focused on getting through each day and making sure they have food in their bellies, and roofs over their heads, and they're very much not aware of the international trade. And so that was part of it, was documenting some of the hunters and poachers and traders, and trying to understand their vantage point, meet their families, and we did a little bit of educating as we went along to try and let people know, like, hey, did you know this was an endangered animal? And you'll hear in the film, like, a lot of people don't even know what that means. They don't have an understanding of what endangered is. Or that this idea that, like, an animal can go extinct. So we did a little bit of education as we went along, to try and help people understand, why this animal is important. And people were really receptive. We even found there's a bunch of people that never ended up in the film, that were also, like, almost equally inspiring. We had a hunter that had decided to stop hunting pangolin. So he was still hunting, but he would just, when he came upon a pangolin, he would leave it be. And we actually got video of him releasing one back to the wild, which is really cool. And this is all just from him finding out and hearing about them being endangered. So yeah, there's definitely some inspiring characters that just kind of came out of the woodwork, even though, we have tons upon tons of pangolin scales being exported out of the Lagos, Nigeria ports. So yeah, it's interesting. And since the film has come out, it has really raised the profile, of what he's doing in Nigeria and the capacity of his conservation, work with pangolins. He's built, a special pangolin rehabilitation center. We're learning more and more that when pangolins are rescued, they need time to rehabilitate and get their strength and be monitored. And those, types of rehab efforts result in a much better release effort, and they have a much better chance of survival in the wild. And so Mark, we've kind of put him in touch with a lot of different people. He's able to coordinate better, both on an international level and on a local level. He has, he's able to do his work with a lot more support. And we've also been able to raise additional funds for him to build more facilities. He has a much better understanding of the pangolin diet and health, the things he needs to make sure that they, can transition back into the wild. So yeah, I think that this is a long-term relationship that, what started with a film is kind of blossomed into this long-term relationship that I hope, continues on forever. And I just couldn't wish Mark and the other folks that are featured in the film, well enough. They're just all incredible, human beings that, are doing wonderful things in an area where wildlife conservation isn't something people talk about. Animals as having value isn't talked about. They don't, it's rarely published in news and magazines. Mark is kind of seen, as this, like, weirdo, this, like, crazy guy for loving animals, and so, I think the film has kind of changed how people see him too. And he's also been, he, in raising his profile, he's been visited by a bunch of other media, storytelling operations, and he's gotten to meet celebrities and, like, he's going to be featured in other feature-length documentaries. So we're just super excited for Mark and the work that he's doing. Yeah, I mean, I think it is an important aspect of conservation, is that we need to include everybody in the conversation, and and that, you know there doesn't need to be these kind of like good versus evil camps. We can work together to build understanding and help each other figure out what is the best way that we can all coexist, and how can we build capacity locally and give people resources locally to continue conservation work and make them feel supported. And so I think that's the only way forward, honestly, is to kind of show and share that nuance. And the more we can basically, highlight local heroes, just normal, everyday people, as having the potential to be conservation oriented, I think the more that those people will, they can see people like Mark and think to themselves like, oh, he's my neighbor. He's protecting these animals. That's fascinating. Or like, I could see myself doing that, and they can basically see themselves in Mark's shoes, also supporting wildlife and conservation efforts. And so I think it's really important to, feature the people who live around these animals every day, and help them see the issue and understand what's at stake, and inspire them to make whatever small changes they can to help protect this animal. It depends, honestly, on the species. I think when you're dealing with trafficking and these animals are stressed and they're being constantly bombarded with being handled and loud noises, once they've been sort of in captivity or being trafficked, they are really easy to film because they just don't even notice when you're right in front of them. And so we try to, we're there, essentially we're there filming Mark rescuing these animals. And so it's kind of exciting because you realize that, oh, wow, we're actually going to save this one from being consumed. And, it's probably, if we didn't pick it up that day, it's probably going to end up on somebody's dinner plate that night. So that was kind of exciting, as you're filming. And I personally am a big fan of intimate close-ups. So whenever I can, either using a long lens or different kinds of macro lenses, anytime I can get closer and show the texture of something and what it is to be close to that, even if I'm not actually close, I try to make it feel like I am. That is, I want to give the audience the feeling that they are right there next to the animal, kind of almost in the shoes of that animal, experiencing these things around them, and give them that kind of like emotional vantage point. And that was actually a big component of the first pangolin film I did, where everything was filmed from the vantage point of the pangolin, kind of low to the ground, looking up at people. And that's something that, I'll probably continue using in my storytelling. I've been following that closely with a bunch of colleagues of mine, and there's no way to truly know for sure if pangolins were the intermediary vector between bats and humans. We just don't have enough data or research in the wet markets when the virus first jumped species. So it's impossible to know that for sure. The data that came out suggests that they could be an intermediary vector. So, we'll keep following that to see what happens. But I think what we're learning is just the simple fact that as we continue to encroach on wild lands and disrupting, biodiverse ecosystems and displacing animals, those animals have zoonotic diseases, and those diseases are going to get passed on to us. And they, they need somewhere to go. There's got to be a spillover, and so I think that's kind of the crux of the argument, is that we need to do what we can to stop encroaching on these wild lands and these animals, and have less human and animal interaction. And so since all of this has happened, there's definitely been some changes, some rapid changes on the pangolin conservation front. Whether or not these changes will result in the species being saved from extinction is still up for grabs. But we've definitely seen some big decisions being made in China, shutting down the consumption of illegal wildlife or wildlife in general. We've also seen them adding protections for pangolins specifically. And then there's also something that's just come out in the last couple of weeks in the US, where they're going to make a decision on whether or not pangolins should have an endangered status in the US, which might extend to further efforts outside the US. So there's lots of little things happening, and whether or not those things are enforced properly is yet to be seen. But it's definitely bringing attention to this animal. And so, yeah, it could be the silver lining of all this. Yeah, absolutely.